Good evening, everybody. I'm so excited to be here and introduce my dear, dear friend, Antonio Howard, someone who is very, very important to me in my life. So Antonio is an autodidactic artist. He was incarcerated as a child at age 15. And I encourage you to think about, as we go tonight, where you were at age 15. He was incarcerated and sentenced to life in prison for second-degree homicide, also known as felony murder in Pennsylvania. He served 26 and a half years in state penitentiaries here in Pennsylvania. While in prison, he educated himself through instructional books on concepts and processes of visual art. Antonio was released in 2018. That was something that, as his attorney, I am not responsible for. We worked together on that. That was a mutual effort. I am blessed to have met him. He lives now as a valued member of the community. He is committed to serving others and creating connection points through art and many, many other mediums that spark meaningful dialogue. He is the 2019 recipient of Erie Arts and Culture's Emerging Artist Fellowship. He is a 2021 teaching artist. He is on the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. And since 2020, you may have seen him or worked with him doing murals all around Erie County, including one honoring 93-year-old veteran, educator, and civic leader, Mr. Luther Manis, who is here in the front row with his beautiful wife, Connie. Antonio is the author of 3 self-published books. He participates as a guest speaker and presenter, focusing on topics, as we're going to hear tonight, related to the criminal legal system, equitable justice. He also works for the federal government, the federal courts, particularly as a paralegal. He is one of my very best friends in the world, and I'm honored to present to you Antonio Howard.
So I learned in this world, when you meet your soulmate, you never do anything without her. So my wife will be presenting with me this evening.
Just to put some context here, I'm reading passages from his book, and then he is going to be giving you his outlook. I grew up in a single-parent home, born to a mother with a split personality. Performing the role of mother and father didn't afford her the sympathy or support that should normally accompany that diagnosis, not even from me, her firstborn. I never really liked my mom. She never seemed to like me either. So if nothing else, we shared that in common. I'm sure she had her reasons, but I can only account for mine.
My name is Antonio Howard. I'm Peggy's son, Peggy Howard Arrington's son. I refer to myself as Peggy's son as acknowledgement to my mother and with the hopes that my demonstration as a man will mitigate the embarrassment I caused her during my childhood. As far back as I can recall, my negative behavior within the Erie community was attributed to her, which impacted her in ways that I'm still discovering. So it's important for me to invoke her name in spaces where my behavior would make her proud.
August 27, 2005. Dear Mom, nearly 20 years of prison experience has taught me this. There's no such thing as free time. Only time to prepare for the times I'll need to be prepared. So I've been preparing for this moment, the moment you finally ask, what can I do to help you? Unfortunately, this moment comes at the expense of moments past. The law has changed drastically over the years, so there's not much you can do to help me in ways I once needed. However, there are a few things I need you to know. First, my being here is not your fault. You didn't fail me, and you didn't fail in your responsibilities as a parent. After you gave birth to me, theoretically, you had 18 years to parent, theoretically. But the fact is, there are only 24 hours in a day. Subtract 8 hours sleep and 8 hours work. You're left with 8 hours per day to raise a child. Multiply that by 365 days in a year, and you get 2,920 hours per year to raise a child. Divide that by 24 hours in a day, and it translates to 121 days and 16 hours. Multiply that number by 18 years, and you're left with 2,190 days in an 18-year period. Divide that by 365 days a year, it leaves 6 years to raise a child. Subtract the first 2 years infancy, and you're left with 4 years. Factor in variables like overtime at a job, time divided between 2 or more children, travel between home and work, a child participating in sports, homework, detention, and in my case, juvenile placements and prison by age 15. What remains is the reality that you didn't actually raise me. The rest of the world did. You were left roughly less than a year, non-contiguous block of time to be a mom, not nearly enough time to perfect it. Secondly, we've both made mistakes, but we're not our mistakes. We're what we learn from them, and every mistake we make comes with a second chance. A chance to prove we learned from them. If you've learned anything from your experience with me, my siblings are your second chance to prove it. Thirdly, my life isn't mine anymore. It hasn't been since the day of my arrest. It can even be argued that it was never mine to begin with. Although you can prove paternity, my life never belonged to you either. But only an in-depth study of history can provide you with an understanding of that concept. As it stands now, my life belongs to the state of Pennsylvania and its employees. Maintaining ownership of it provides money to put food on their table and send their children to college. So any fight you wage on my behalf is a fight to take jobs from the profiteers of my shortcomings. To put it another way, fighting for my freedom means fighting against a system programmed to defend itself to the death, your death or its own. The system has a human face, sometimes black or white, sometimes male or female. But like all faces, it registers many different expressions as needed to convince you of whatever it wants to do at the time. It also speaks with a human voice, but beware, it has a forked tongue. It will claim to promote bonds between prisoners and their families, and then send its captives, your children, to the opposite end of the world, making it nearly impossible for you to visit. It'll even inflate the cost of collect calls beyond what you can afford. For families committed even through the roughest times, the system simply waits you out until time eventually takes its toll. The lives of many families have been destroyed by this experience. Families whose enthusiasm, like yours, provides a false sense of preparedness for protracted combat. So I'll say to you what I would have said to them. Educate yourself on the subject first. Finally, it's important that you build a support system out there for yourself. A support system composed of others who've been affected by this situation and are willing to unite with you for the sake of saving their own children trapped here. Even if you're only able to unite with one other person, it's better than being alone. Because the moment this system knows you're alone, it will interpret your isolation as an opportunity to abuse you and your constitutional rights with impunity. There are millions of women like you isolated with no power or meaningful connection to one another because they don't know they share this experience in common. You have to find them and unite with them. Learning begins with the first opportunity. It doesn't matter if you learn through failure or success. It's still learning. The time between the first opportunity and the second is simply an opportunity to prepare for the moment you'll need to be prepared. Sincerely, Antonio.
The primary source of my mother's embarrassment stems from my involvement with the criminal justice system. And since the age of 12, I've been involved with the criminal justice system in one way or another: juvenile probation, juvenile prisons, foster care, and by the age of 15, I was being shipped off to Western State Penitentiary's general population to begin serving a life sentence in the state of Pennsylvania, where life means life without possibility of parole. And I was being shipped there for my role in the robbery that resulted in the senseless shooting death of an elderly cab driver and member of the Erie community named Richard Stevens. It's important that I invoke his name here because since 1991, the year I committed the crime, our story is forever linked. And although there is nothing I can do to restore his life, I am obligated to keep his name alive. And I'm obligated to be committed to disrupting the cycle of violence in our communities that is sure to result in the demise of the next Richard Stevens. In the case of children in our community, trauma can stunt or accelerate aspects of their development not readily identifiable to observers. So it's possible for a man to be childish and a child to be mannish, to use one of my grandmother's words. My personal trauma is responsible for my own dual personality. I'm a 40-something-year-old man who frequently evaluates the world through the eyes of the child I used to be. I am an adult, yes, but I'm still a child internally. That's one of the things I discovered during my journey toward adulthood, that you never stop being a child internally. You just acquire more experiences that seem to demand that you suppress it. I'm fortunate, however, to have found balance between the two, meaning that the child in me has agreed to yield to the evolved man that I've become. And the evolved man has agreed to articulate and acknowledge the grievances of the child once incapable of adequately doing so himself. That acknowledgement and articulation can take on many forms, including defensiveness when I hear adults speak of children as lost causes, incorrigible, or throwaways, as Pennsylvania Superior Court Judge Victor Stable categorized us during a tour of his judicial chambers facilitated by the Jefferson Society during my participation as a member of the Civic Leadership Academy in 2022. Based on our brief conversation afterwards, I don't think he had ever considered the possibility that there was someone once sentenced to life in prison sitting in the audience of a cohort of future leaders. But to his credit, during our conversation, he did retract some of what he had said after I identified myself as one of those he categorized as throwaways. It's disappointing what adults say about us in our absence, but sometimes even more so when they say those things in our presence. But no matter what they say, prison is nowhere for children.
According to conventional wisdom, things get better with time. That's not always true, however. When you're doing time, and I've been doing time for a long time, yet prison hasn't adjusted well to me. Of course, prison officials would have me believe I should be the one adjusting, but they contradict themselves when they suggest this environment was tailored for people like me. After all, since when is a tailor-made suit tailor-made if it doesn't conform to the dimensions of the man it's tailored to? It's not. I've been a forced fit in each of the 8 prisons I've been excised from, a forced fit since the day of my arrest 20 years ago.
As a child, it always felt like adults worked so hard at distancing themselves from my response to the world around me by pretending their abuse of me had nothing to do with it. That feeling hasn't changed since becoming an adult. I was a victim of abuse by adults as a child, and being abused influenced the way I interacted with the world around me. That, however, is not an excuse. It's context. And that's one of the messages I hope readers walk away with after reading my book. Because when you understand the behaviors of children, including children who commit acts of violence, as the byproduct of what we teach them and how we treat them, it should temper our anger toward them. Because to be angry toward them is to be angry toward ourselves. It's when that causal relationship is broken that our anger morphs into revenge. And because it's perverted to conceptually seek revenge against the child as an adult, we adultify them and codify all the reasons that children who are the subject of our revenge aren't really children at all. They're little adults that should be working in coal mines. They're little adults that should be concubines to adult European Renaissance painters. They're little adults, hot-blooded slaves who sexually force themselves upon grown slave masters. They're little adult criminals deserving of adult time for adult crimes. They're little adult super predators who should be locked in adult prisons for the rest of our lives.
The first day of anything is usually the hardest. For me, it was the first unofficial day of school, Enrollment Day, 1986. It was especially difficult because I knew I'd have to endure the consignment ritual. The consignment ritual was one I experienced many times before. It involved my mom introducing me as a bad seed, followed by a theatrical smack to the back of my head for emphasis. On its surface, it was a fairly innocuous ritual, but I'm convinced it had the effect of teaching other adults how to treat me. And so it was. After that sacred ritual was performed, principal and teachers alike sought to establish themselves as my disciplinarians rather than my educators. McKinley happened to employ one of my most brutal disciplinarians of all, Mr. Moffett. I don't recall much about him except that he was a white man with bad breath. As precocious as I was, I'm likely to have told him that, which might explain why he dragged me from his classroom and choked me until I lost consciousness. Whatever his reasons were, I ran home, expecting my mom to avenge me. She didn't. She didn't even believe me. Instead, she focused on me leaving school without permission. She beat me once at home and then escorted me back to school and beat me while the principal and Mr. Moffett watched. From that day forward, I carried knives to school, and I abandoned all faith in my mother.
On November 8th, 2017, I was brought before Erie County Court Common Pleas Judge Shad Conley, where a white-bearded, barrel-chested white man lumbers to a microphone with righteous indignation in his face. The man's name is Scott Cleaver. He is the nephew of Richard Stevens. I had already been sentenced to life without parole for my involvement in that crime and had already served more than 25 years up to that point. However, I was there to be resentenced following a U.S. Supreme Court decision requiring judges to reevaluate the life sentences handed down to those of us who committed our crimes prior to the age of 18. I had no expectation of being released from prison. I know what serving a life sentence is like, so I was there that day to facilitate releasing the family of Richard Stevens from the prison I confined them to by denying my involvement in the crime up to that point. That effort took the form of an apology and an acknowledgement of the irreparable harm I caused. It was now Scott Cleaver's opportunity to speak on behalf of Mr. Stevens, himself, and his family. He gave a very heartfelt and impassioned speech, and the pain I caused his family was evident by the tears in his eyes. He ended his speech by saying he believed I deserved a second chance. I was paroled a year later I was paroled a year later. Mr. Cleaver passed away 15 days following my release. The rest of what you know of me today flows from that experience, being afforded a pathway back by members of the Erie community after having been condemned to die in prison for the crime I committed. This book was written before my second chance, but it is an extension of it, if for no other reason than in 1992, long before I wrote this book, at my original sentencing for my crime, Judge Shad Conley acknowledged that I was not a throwaway.
The prosecution disagrees with me vehemently, and that is their right. It may even be their duty, but I'm going to impose concurrent sentences, basically because of your age. I do not believe you are hopeless. I do not believe you are beyond all efforts of rehabilitation, and I do not believe that someday you may come to the maturity that is necessary for someone to once again be released. But that is not a decision for me to make. But I do believe, under the circumstances, that you are entitled to, at least to the outside opportunity that at some point it may be deemed appropriate to commute your life sentence.
I wrote this book for multiple reasons. One being that writing for me was cathartic. It was a way to work through past traumas, some of which stem from being denied a voice throughout my childhood and being condemned to listen to my story narrated by my abusers. I've often imagined that if my wife had to evaluate a future with me based solely on what my abusers had written about me, I wouldn't have stood a chance.
I hadn't spoken to my mother in several years before my arrival at Dallas. Prior to that, most of our telephone conversations didn't qualify as conversations. They were more like strongly worded debates, to say the least. My opinion and perspective never mattered to her, and she constantly reminded me of my place in nature's hierarchy. I'm the parent, and you're the child. You can't teach me nothing. Nearly all our phone calls ended that way, even the phone calls I considered most productive, such as the calls during which she'd ask questions like, "Why did you do the things you did when you were young?" "Because I didn't feel like you wanted me," I responded. She countered with, "That ain't the reason. You did what you did because you was hard-headed and you couldn't run me like you ran Justine." Then I'd say, "Well, if you knew the answer, why did you ask?" "I just wanted to see if you was gonna lie." "You can't get nothing over me. I'm the parent, you're the child." We wouldn't speak for weeks, months, and in this case, years after.
Another reason I wrote this book was because there are only 26 letters in the English alphabet. And I reached a point in my life where I felt like I had exhausted every conceivable combination of those letters within the realm of my vocabulary and made a choice not to spend the second half of my life repeating what I had said during the first half. This book was my saying it once. I never imagined I'd be standing here trying to make sense of it all over again. In fact, I presumed I'd be dead by now, long before I had the opportunity to publish it. I made a conscious choice to self-publish it because having someone tell me it wasn't enough or that it was too candid would have translated to me as another reminder that I didn't have the right to narrate my own story from any other perspective than that of my abusers and my keepers.
September 4th, 2003. Dear Dad, I write this letter with hopes of addressing any concerns you might have pertaining to the situation on our visit and my less than manly response to it. It's important to me that you fully understand the effect prison has had on me, the most obvious being my awkwardness around women. Having been physically arrested at 15 also arrested important areas of my social development, including my ability to interact with women, especially when that interaction hinges upon me initiating it. I haven't grown beyond the experience of notes that say, I like you, do you like me? Check yes or no. I feel frozen in time, stuck in an era where flirting involved offering a girl my soda pop and secretly watching to see if she'd drink after me without first wiping the spout. To be amputated from that experience and thrust into an environment where all women are bitches, tricks, and whores, according to my peers, beneath us, according to you, sisters and queens, according to nation ideology, and correctional officers to be unofficially feared and officially respected, according to the DOC policy. It's confusing at best and debilitating at worst. I struggle with fundamental social skills like that in the same way other human beings who conduct most of their social interaction over the internet struggle with face-to-face communication. That doesn't make me less of a man. It makes me an example of the effects of social alienation and isolation. Blood cell, skin cell, prison cell, it's all life. Antonio. He never responded to my letter. However, when I called him on the telephone and asked if he understood my perspective, he said no. After that, I actually started thinking there was something wrong with me.
It's difficult enough to write a book, so I didn't actually set out to write a book. I started journaling and later compiled some of my journal entries into book form. After that, I had to find the courage to publish it. So during the process of writing it, I shared the manuscript with others to try and get a sense of what they thought about it. I discovered that there's a consensus among critics of prison narrative that most prisoners make for poor writers. I'm told that the reason is in part due to our tendency to complain. In fact, it's been said that the most reliable measure of a good writer is his ability to tell a story without sounding like he's complaining. But men like me who've spent 26 and a half years in prison appreciate the impossibility of that task. I would imagine that's why a small percentage of us, including myself, become visual artists, and through our art, we allow our experiences the freedom to narrate themselves.
My first painting was worth every second of the 2.5 months worth of sweat equity I invested in producing it. It was one of my African masks painted on a 24 by 36 stretched canvas. I titled it Wisdom because I borrowed its shape from a human wisdom tooth. It was colorfully abstract and unusually interesting, according to the prison staff attending the exhibit. Antonio, is this your work? One of the admirers asked. Yes, I replied. I had no idea. Good job. Is it for sale? I'd love to have this on my living room wall. At that moment, as much as I was imprisoned, I wasn't a prisoner anymore. I was Antonio, a human being, a painter. I was a painter who, with the right colors and shapes, could alter perceptions and scale heaven-high walls with one stroke of a paintbrush. I endeavored to do just that, and I made significant progress over the next 3 years. I could go anywhere in the prison with a painting under my arm without being harassed or interrogated. That's saying a lot as a prisoner in Graterford at that time. I was free as a man could be inside a maximum security prison.
My venture into art led me to paint Power in 1999. That's this piece here. And like the name suggests, it depicts my interpretation of power. Because as a kid, I was infatuated with the concept of power and strength through exercise of physical will. I had to be in prison. I aspired to be an alpha, and being an alpha is always associated with the qualities of the lion, hence the sandy brown color scheme of this mask. The concept of what being alpha is in our communities is a concept pursued by many of my peers. And it has a lot to do with who I was becoming on my way to adulthood. I've never heard of alpha spoken of by anyone who didn't use the lion as their reference. But the lion is uniquely predatorial. And my life exemplifies the dangers of choosing a predator as your totem. So in my desperation to become alpha, king, or lion-esque, I was embarking on my journey to becoming what Hillary Clinton called a super predator, when referring to a generation of my peers to usher in a new wave of criminal justice reforms that paved the way for children to be in prison for the rest of their lives. No one ever explained that being alpha didn't require me to be a predator. No one ever told me that there were alpha bumblebees, alpha meerkats, koala bears, and rhinoceroses. I didn't know I could be an alpha without being a predator, or that if I gave up being a predator, I could still claim respect, confidence, and security of being an alpha. I learned that through the study and self-discovery while writing, and soon discovered a quote that memorialized that for me. The strong control the weak, but the wise control the strong. And soon after, I wanted to be alpha wise rather than alpha strong. And not alpha lion wise, but alpha rhinoceros wise. But even in becoming rhinoceros wise, there's always the danger of the now dormant definition of alpha regaining control in the form of the kind of toxic masculinity discussed on August 4th of this year during Dr. Rhonda Matthews' lecture, The Slap Heard Around the World, where she explored toxic masculinity through the lens of Will Smith slapping Chris Rock during the Academy Awards. And prior to that, during Dr. Paris Baker's lecture on June 16th, called Footsteps of Our Fathers, a discussion on fatherhood, where he referenced the phrase, going hard in the paint. But my power mask was also a reminder that being an alpha in whatever iteration I explored it, I still had no voice. I was a prisoner. But my search for a caption to complement my power mask pointed me in the direction of what I needed to do. Only when lions have historians will hunters cease to be heroes. That's what the proverb said. To me, that meant I needed to become an historian of my own experiences, which meant I needed to write and publish. Otherwise, my abusers would always be known as heroes because my story would be the only story that went untold.
Upon my arrival, I was taken to see a 2-member board of prison officials identical in function to the board of officials I saw when I arrived at Dallas State Prison. Similarly, they bandied allegations about my past. I was accused of being the leader of a security threat group, or as he called it, an STG. At the time, I had no idea what an STG was, so I asked, "What's an STG?" "A gang member," one of the administrators answered. "Apparently you were a leader in the new Black Panther Party. Are you still currently an active member?" "I've never been a gang member or active in the new Black Panther Party," I responded. "So you're no longer a member?" "I was never a member." He gestured to a file folder and said, "Are you saying we're making all this up?" "What I'm saying is that I was never a member of the Black Panther Party or any other gang." "Well, your file says different. We know that the Nation of Islam is a cover for the new Black Panther Party, and if you were a member of the Nation of Islam, then you were a member of the new Black Panther Party. Says here, you're a dangerous inmate." He said all of this while pulling what he referred to as exhibits from a phone book thick file folder bearing my name. He may as well have been pulling rabbits from a hat, because by the end of his performance, I thought he was a magician. For dramatic effect, he brandished one of the exhibits near his face and said, "By the looks of this, you're an inmate who wants to shoot me." It was a picture of a gun that appeared to have been torn from a magazine. Initially, I was amused, but the novelty of it wore off with each exhibit that followed. At one point, you tried to escape from Frackville. You enjoy assaulting staff, apparently, he continued. Orchestrated a hunger strike while at Dallas. It goes on and on. You haven't adjusted well, have you, Mr. Howard? He asked rhetorically. Prison was made for people like you. Then he flipped through the file folder again and rambled off a list of grievances I filed over the years, followed by references to more exhibits he hinted at but decided I shouldn't see. If only have yourself to blame for your file, no one else, he remarked. That might be true if that were my file, I interrupted, but that's not my file. I explained. My file contains a record of my academic achievements, my involvement in the wheelchair restoration program while at Graterford, and other accomplishments that offer a far more balanced narrative. You judge me from one infraction to another while ignoring everything in between. You ignore the fact that much of what you read about me is grossly exaggerated, and you aren't at all interested in knowing why or how things occur. What are we referring to here? The fact you've assaulted several staff members? That's part of it, but, well, Mr. Howard, as far as I'm concerned, there's never a justifiable reason to assault an officer. I wouldn't care if your mother was being raped by my officers. You don't lift a finger to defend her. Is that understood?
During my imprisonment, I always felt alone, and I believed that I was alone until I read the first published copy of my book. That's when I discovered that the same thing the author of Footprints in the Sand discovered, that during the times I thought I had been abandoned were the times I had been carried.
In 1993, at age 16, I met Kim, the woman my father refers to as a white devil bitch. He never actually met her, but by his logic, if you've met one, you've met them all. If that's true, then white devil bitches everywhere owe her a debt of gratitude. My father, at the very least, owes her enough respect to call her by her given name. Kim, after all, was the single most influential human being in my life at one point. She stewarded me from teenager to manhood at her own peril. She was my best friend, primary supporter, and for years my only meaningful connection to the outside world. I loved her, and she loved me. By no stretch of the imagination, though, was it love at first sight. Our introduction was, at best, antagonistic. I was a prisoner and she was a correctional officer. I was an alleged follower of Louis Farrakhan and she was a white woman. By both accounts, we were enemies and we both understood as much the moment we met. Looks like we got another one, her sergeant whispered. Looks like it, she replied. Got another what? I inquired. Got another FOI. You're FOI, aren't you? She responded. What makes you say that? I questioned. Well, you don't have any hair on your face, and your shirt is tucked in and buttoned to the top, and your boots are polished, she explained. The same can be said for you. You don't have hair on your face, your boots are polished, shirt tucked in and buttoned to the top. Does that also mean you're FOI, I quipped. A smart ass too, she said sarcastically. Suddenly the nurse called me in for my physical. Our duel would have to continue another time. I had no idea it would follow me into the nurse's station. I sat down, and the nurse began asking me standard background questions and noting my answers. Eventually, she asked for my birth date. I answered, and she asked again. I answered once more, and she summoned Kim, who was still manning her post outside the door. She explained to Kim that I was being uncooperative by providing false information. Specifically, she clarified, I was claiming to be 16 years old. Kim, being the cop she was, threatened to throw me in the hole if I refused to provide the nurse with my correct date of birth. This went on for a few more minutes until Kim picked up the phone and, after calling around, determined I was indeed 16 years old. That information spread throughout the medical department like wildfire, and before long, several other nurses crowded around me like wise men visiting the baby Jesus. Pardon me. One of them started crying and had to be consoled by another. I have a son your age, she sobbed. What are you doing here? As if that wasn't enough, even Kim's disposition towards me changed drastically. She went from standing akimbo and issuing commands to kneeling beside me and communicating in maternal tones. I just sat silently thinking to myself, these bitches is crazy. I didn't know what else to think. That is, until Kim, my new surrogate mother, laid down the law. From now on, she said, you're under my wing, Antonio. I'm going to make a few calls, and you're going to be in school and out of trouble. Unbutton your top button, and when you're done here, come out in the hallway. She ended her speech with a brief hug and sauntered back to her post. In the moment it took her to depart, I surrendered. I unbuttoned my top button, and for the first time in prison, I felt safe. That night, I made every effort to put our conversation in perspective. I couldn't. Part of the problem was that my thoughts would drift. I started out thinking, she can't dictate my future to me. She can't force me to read and write book reports and attend school. She can't tell me who I shouldn't socialize with or how I should handle my problems. I'm grown. I don't have to listen to her. In fact, I'm not listening to her. I don't even know her. Suddenly I'm thinking, she does smell good though.
There were several other people besides Kim in my life who showed up to carry me by caring about me and investing in the person standing before you today. I don't know why, and I'm not even sure I fully appreciated their presence in real time. I just know writing this book helped me to identify them.
To Kim, a woman who lived the life of rumors when they were lies and exaggerated truths. To Troy Mozon, all bonds without friendship are shackles, and there's no virtue in their maintenance. To John Galizia of the Pennsylvania Prison Society, if not for you, I'd be dead by now and alleged to have committed suicide. To Joe Heckel of Fight for Lifers West, for all the reasons you gave to right and for all the reasons you were right. To David Lee, if they knew who you were, they'd have stolen you from us long ago. To PIG, for seeing what I couldn't when I wouldn't, and being a brother to me before we were even friends. To Carol Williams, for all the times your name won't be mentioned by those of us who owe you more. Lastly, to all who were sentenced to life without parole inside adult prisons while still just kids. If you've made it through the past, you've passed.
Among the names you heard mentioned was David Lee, and he is nothing short of remarkable. He is the surest example of what it means to be an evolved human being. This is him here. He is not only my friend and brother, he is also yours. He is by every stretch of the imagination the man that you pray your loved ones cross paths with if they were ever to suffer the fate of imprisonment for any length of time. At age 59, David has been in prison now for 34 years and has worked ceaselessly to free every mind that he has come into contact with in the hopes of ensuring that upon their return to the community, they contribute to the betterment of it. Among the many things that he taught me was this: it's not enough to opt out of criminogenic thinking and behavior. Those of us who have contributed to the death and destruction of the community must actively participate in repairing the damage, and we must do so with the same unapologetic commitment and dedication we exhibited while destroying it. I invite you all to reach out to Dave and explore ways he can assist in disrupting the cycle of violence within our communities. And I leave you with this message: a child is always worth more than his worst mistake. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Antonio?
Okay, then
She has a question.
Oh.
Raven, she has a question.
I just want to tell you how very proud I am of you and this lake.
Thank you, sister. Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you. I can't start crying. I can't shed my coat.
That's the truth. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. That's all I can say. It's unbelievable. God bless you, Antonio and Sarah.
Thank you, Connie. She wants the mic. Yes.
I'll be good. So I met Antonio in 2022, and I really don't have a question. But like Connie, you have done a remarkable job. And just like the comment that your brother David Lee has on the board there, you are unapologetically giving back to this community in ways that people who have been here forever have not done. And I just appreciate what you've done by pouring into this community, and I want to encourage you to continue to do so. And I wish that there were others who have gone through half of what you've gone through would come out and do just that, and to unapologetically make a commitment to build up the community. So I love you, kudos, and continue on this wonderful journey that you have in front of you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
And I'm also just going to stand and say thank you. How you doing, my brother?
All right, sir.
This young man didn't know me from Adam. Just a few months ago, when I was going through surgeries and recuperating in the hospital, he came every day, and he sat with me, and he talked with me, and I found out I know his family from way back, like they say. But he's just an amazing person. And just to sit down and talk to him is just, it fills your heart, and it kind of makes you think that there is more out there that you can do. So just thank you again, because it truly meant the world to me to have somebody who would take out of their day, and a couple of times you came to see me, you hadn't gotten any sleep. You had gone to work and done some other things, and I'm like, man, what's this dude doing? If it was me, I'd be at home sleeping, But you came and you stayed with me, not for a minute, not for 2 minutes. I think one or two times you were with me for maybe an hour or two. So once again, I just want to thank you for that, because that to me is amazing.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
I remember when I first heard about you, I had just made it to Erie, and I didn't know who he was, and I was like, I need to meet this person. And to sit here in this audience and hear your story, and to see these kids in here, and they also hear your story, it also gives them hope. And I have made mistakes in my life too that had made me think that I couldn't do what you're standing up there doing. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
I could do a lot of stuff, but I'm not. I'm just gonna do this. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. That's what it's about. What you're doing is what it's about.
Yes, sir.
That's real power. Appreciate you.
Yes, sir.
You know, I can't say enough about you. You know that, right? I've known Antonio off and on for maybe his entire life. And we have great discussions when he and I meet. And one thing I always tell him is this: you're never your past, you're always your future. And I appreciate everything that you have done and you meant to this community. And for the young people in this community, I say that you have no better role model than Antonio Howard. I love you, my brother.
Love you too, brother. Love you too. Love you too, brother.
Thanks for sharing your story. Just impressive. Everybody loves a good love story. Tell us how you two met, especially your opinion, your dad's opinion of white women and your own admitted shortcomings of social skills. I mean, there's not a lot of room to practice social skills on the inside. How'd this thing happen?
Didn't you hear this? I think I told you this story before.
I know, but they want to hear it.
Go ahead, Denzel.
So I think it had more to do with Kim than me, right? Kim, at her own peril, sought a relationship with me that was purely platonic. But as a kid, I had the desire for more. Kim warned me early on that for sake of my growth and development, she would accommodate that. But that the end result would be that she couldn't love me as a surrogate son. She would have to love me as a man, which meant that the relationship would eventually surely die, right? How it happened was Kim had been writing me letters while I was in the same prison. She had been sending me books. And at one point, the prison administration found out about it. And the rest, you'll have to read my book to figure it out.
But to answer you, Antonio was released on May the 7th, and I met him May the 12th.
This is not Kim, by the way.
Yeah, no, I'm Sarah.
Just to clarify.
He was there at JCPenney's trying to buy a suit. And the men in the audience know they only buy a suit for a few reasons. And it was my last day at JCPenney's. It was my last 30 minutes. We were really busy. It was a Saturday. Why my last day was on a Saturday, I do not know, but it was. And I ran stock. And for 30 minutes, I'm like, I'm not pulling another cart out in these crazy people. So I'm just gonna waste whatever time I have to waste. And the suit department was overflowing with people, and in my particular position, I knew enough about suits to get myself in trouble, as they say. Antonio stood in front of one of those lovely mirrors in a suit coat that was too big.
Posing to be chosen, Denzel Washington all the way.
Yes,
Like,
yes, he
you're
was.
leaving that part out.
He was. Next to him sat John Galizia, that we had mentioned in the acknowledgments. A typical retired New York City police officer who had been with Antonio for 20-something years. And he had come to town to show Antonio how to live out here, literally how to step off a curb, right? So he's looking in this mirror and he's relishing in his suit coat, which was too big, and I'm like,
What's it too big?
I'm like, you don't need this. What size do you want? What are you getting a suit for? And he did not want to tell me. Did not want to tell me. And John had warned him, don't tell people you just got out of prison. So this went on for about 15 minutes. And finally, he's just, and he grips the edge of a four-way, and he's like, I believe that you should dress for where you want to be in life, not where you are at that moment. He said, I was just released from prison. And I looked at him, and I'm like looking around going, you're telling me this? And at this point, the look on his face was terror, like, oh, I should not have told her this. I said, my brother has been in prison for 15, 16 years at this point. And he looked at me, and he just bear hugged me, like we had been friends from a long time ago.
You leaned in a little bit. I don't want you to leave that out. Like, you was...
So, he did not buy a suit that day, but I had told him that it was my last day and where I was going, and that this was on a Saturday, and Monday morning he showed up at my new job, and we have been together ever since. A year later, we got married, and yeah, doing this thing called life and art, and he still fancies himself as a Denzel, and
Squint your eyes, turn on the light. You can
but
see it.
that's the true story. He will tell you a different one, but that is the truth.
Any more questions? Okay.
Oh, the card.
Oh.
The card.
It was appropriate that it came today.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Read it out loud, or? Okay. So this is a letter that was sent to Jenny Haggerty from Jamie Barnett, and she requested that I read it. The card itself is a work of art done by Jamie Barnett, Christmas card. If any of you are ever lucky enough to get prison art, cherish it. There's a lot that goes into it and a lot of obstacles we have to traverse to create it. This is special in and of itself without the words, right? So the letter reads as follows. Dear Jenny, hello. By the time this letter reaches you, I hope and pray it finds you well. My name is Jamie Burnett. I'm a 51-year-old male, African-American, born and raised in Erie, PA. My motive for writing you is truly sincere, and I read the wonderful things you and Antonio Howard and his wife are doing at the Mercy Anchor Community Center with the beautiful artwork. Antonio is an associate of mine for a long time in prison, and he's a great inspiration for guys like me. By the blessings of God, my life is now on the right track, and I'm looking forward to offer my volunteer services to the greater community of Erie and giving back in a positive way. No disrespect, Jenny. I just was inspired by the news article, and I wanted to send you and the community center this card I made, and to let you know I'm really thankful we have a great people such as you doing wonderful things. Hope and like this card. Sincerely, Jamie. Wow.
For those of you who have not seen the mural we just completed at the Mercy Anchor Center, it was truly a community mural. We had a lot of women who are there help us. And we had just talked about people who have been there for Antonio while he was in prison. And while we were putting this whole thing together, we were talking about how there needs to be a part 2, a volume 2, because interestingly enough, the people have not stopped. Those people who are holding not just him up, but me as well. Jenny Haggerty is one. Connie Manis, which is, she and Luther are a book all of their own for what they have done for him and myself.
Dempsey Arrington.
Dempsey Arrington as well. He's gonna be mad that you said that, but that's okay.
I know.
Jean.
Jean of my dreams, Jean of my
Yeah.
dreams, yes.
The list of people goes on and on. Maria, where is she hiding? Side note with Maria was Antonio had fired two other attorneys when he was getting resentenced. They didn't listen, they didn't want to help him, they just had their own agendas. Maria wrote him a letter and said, "Give me a chance." I call her a blonde pit bull. And I'm telling you what, without her and him working together, he would not be standing here. Patrick Fisher, I can't not exclude you in this. Again, he met Patrick almost from the get-go. He had intended to not do art at all. He was just going to get a job, put his nose to the grindstone, and create a life. Patrick showed him that his art was worth continuing, and
Absolutely.
it will continue as long as I'm married to him. Because it's not only good for his soul, it's good for the soul of the community. The list goes on and on, and yeah, when the second volume comes out, we'll do this again.
So we have some questions and comments from online. Marianne Alba says, "Thank you for your voice, so meaningful," and I know she bought a book earlier, so thank you, Marianne.
Thank you, Marianne.
We also have a comment that says, "Where can we buy Antonio's book?"
Amazon.com. Yep.
Or if you're here, we're having a book sale after this program. And then the final question online is, are there any individuals who you've worked with formally or through your work as a muralist who have encouraged you?
Yeah, nearly everybody I work with, because during those murals, everybody shares their story, right? People you don't think have the same beginnings as you discover that they actually do. And even if they don't, they know someone who does and empathize in ways that you may never expect. And those connection points are always inspirational. Talk, man.
Do you have any ways to control my anger at school? To get me out of trouble?
Yeah. So
Very good question.
ordinarily, I would say I would rather talk to you personally, right? Because I was you, right?
Okay.
I was you. And a lot of what I have to say is not the conventional wisdom that adults want me to convey. So I would say talk to me privately after this. You hear what I'm telling you?
Yes.
And we can stay in touch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can show you how to channel all of that energy to achieve goals instead of destroying things, man.
Okay.
You hear what I'm telling you?
Yes.
Thank you. First, thank you, Antonio and Sarah, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us and all that you've done in our community. But I have something to ask the audience. You are all aware that we have children being sent to jail, charged as adults. It seems to be ramping up as the election comes next year for a DA, and our current acting DA really likes charging children as adults. So I hope everyone in this audience is prepared to do some work next year.
Before you begin, I would just add something to that too. Former District Attorney Jack Denary, originally opposed my resentencing and my release. I never thought in my life that your suggestion, doing the work, meant anything other than getting them the fuck out of office. You hear me? And I say this to you now because sometimes establishing relationships with people and giving them the opportunity to glimpse into the world that you live and the people's lives that they're affecting can sometimes be the same kind of work to jettison their former selves and introduce new people. You hear me? People can change. I can't stand here before you and say that I've changed if I don't believe other people can, right? Former District Attorney Jack Denary actually went on record in the newspaper to say that I was the example of what success looks like, and that he was wrong for opposing my release. You hear me? That's a hell of a change. He then went even further and wrote a letter of recommendation for me for a commutation. You hear me? And I want everybody to understand that. In many cases, we don't believe we have the opportunity to establish relationships with people. And those people who don't have relationships with us are primarily shaped by their primary social circle. We have to become part of them social circles. It ain't just adversarial, right? We need to become allies. We need to insert ourselves in environments where we think we aren't wanted, people say we aren't wanted, right? And demonstrate to them our humanity, the damage they're doing to our communities, intentionally or unintentionally, and have discussions about it. And if that don't work, get them out of there.
This thing on? Okay, hold up. This thing on? Okay, sorry. I suppose what I wanted to ask, man, this is really weird. Okay, I suppose what I wanted to ask was, because I think you mentioned that a few times while you were in prison, you did have those moments where people were offering you help. Initially, I remember you described that people were offering you help, but you had the mindset of, well, you're your own man. And I'm just wondering, what steps did you take to kind of like combat that, saying like, you know what, like, yeah, I have my own way of thinking, but there's another way, or recognizing that, well, yeah, my way of thinking hasn't really been working out for me so far. How do I get over that?
Much of that had to do with Kim and having discussions beyond my years and reading books that broadened my horizons, right? And then having to talk about them, right? Explore different concepts, expanding my vocabulary, right? Because if I would have spent my 26 and a half years on the basketball court with the same group of friends who weren't interested in transforming their lives, I'd be a damn good basketball player. I'd be standing up here with a basketball like, yo, this is how you handle. You understand? So people come into your lives and they can either challenge you beyond your boundaries, or they can require you to stay the same person you have been. And there are people who need you to stay the same person you've been, because if you change, it's a reminder of what they haven't done for themselves. When I was a kid, I was best friends with former city councilman Curtis Jones, right? And for all intents and purposes, the night of my crime, Curtis should have been with me. We was always together. You hear what I'm telling you? Always together. The thing he had to benefit him was that his mother and father always pulled him back. Always pulled him back. But encouraged him to separate from me, right? What I would offer you is that there's an alternative. I wished that they would have inserted themselves into my life. You hear me? I wish that I would have been invited to dinner, told to take my shoes off, wash my hands, and pray before I ate. You hear me? As much as we don't want our kids to associate with other kids that we believe to be bad seeds, that bad seed might be, you might be that bad seed's first opportunity at a different perspective. But if you stay away, I ain't the man I am today. You hear me? You have the ability to influence every cipher you enter, just like that environment has the ability to influence you. If you never step into it for fear of being affected by it, the people who need to be affected by you will never change, my man. You hear me? Never. So it's important for us to step into environments that we think that we can't be helped in because people did that for me in prison. When Kim was a prison guard doing what she did for me, it's supposed to get her immediately fired. She knows that. You hear what I'm telling you? Immediately fired. And we're all faced with them situations every day in our lives, right? Even if it means walking past somebody and saying, hello, how are you? And keep walking. We have the opportunity to opt out of discriminations that we impose upon people every day. Every day. Opt out of the daisy chain of trauma imposed upon many of us on a daily basis by just saying hello. Even if you get an F you back, guess what? You opted out. You hear me? You opted out. Your shoulders are broad enough to bear the burden of that. That's where I'm at. Take your time. I'll wait. Figure it out. So the first chance, what'd you say? That's okay. Practice makes perfect, you hear me?
When did y'all get married?
What'd you say?
When did y'all get married?
When did you meet?
Oh, I know this answer.
Well, let's hear it.
I've failed this test plenty of times. October.
23rd.
See, she finishes my sentence. This is why I love her.
What year was it?
Case.
It feels like forever, babe.
Yeah. It was 2019, and actually, we're blessed right now that Maria was there when we got married, and Miss Jean right here was the other witness. So, yeah.